dice your onions for your salmon cakes. Not too fine, but not big. I diced 1 large onion for 4 cans of salmon. So you just need a small onion if you're doing 1 or 2 cans of salmon. Again, I'm doing 4 cans of salmon. So for those 4 cans of salmon, I'm going to leave the top off of 1, but for the other 3 cans, I will be leaving the top on and using the top to drain the salmon juice. I'm going to pour this in a cup just in case Dad wants to use it with dog's food. Sometimes he gets Pop-Pop to eat more if Pop-Pop feel like he has some flavor in his food. So I got a clean bowl. The onions are there. And what I'm gonna do with the salmon is I'm gonna open it up. And you see those bones? I'm gonna pick as many of those bones out as I can because we don't want our salmon cakes to be crunchy. Okay, again, we are using 1 can of the juice. So I poured the juice, the salmon that I left the juice in is already there. And the rest of it, we're gonna drain into this cup for the dog's food. So if you're making 4 cans, use 1 to drain for juice because you don't want your salmon cakes to be really dry. You need something, some kind of base liquid in there to break up the bread. So I'm draining the last 2 cans, putting it in there, and now I'm going to break it down where I will take out the bones. When I say bones, as you can see, these are the fish's vertebrae. So they're little circles. I never mind the little circles, but Jeff hates the little circles. So what I do is I go in and I open the fish. Usually you could just, you know, there's always an opening because they smush them in there together. And you usually can see the vertebrae. And this is the vertebrae. So I'm gonna take this whole vertebrae out and put it to the side. We don't need that. It does make the fish a little crunchy and some people just don't like that. I don't mind it. This one actually has 2 vertebrae. So that means it came from 2 salmon. And then there's a 3rd vertebrae. So this is 3 salmons thrown into 1 can. So it's really easy to find the vertebrae. Again, you can leave the vertebrae in. Just when you're mushing your salmon together, make sure you mush it finely. And sometimes, you know, you'll just feel the vertebrae, like just now I just felt a vertebrae. And you can put those to the side as you want to mush them if you don't want to kind of do that surgical routine I just did. All right, so we have all of the salmon broken down, vertebrae taken out. And now we're gonna add 1 egg per can. So because I have 4 cans, we're gonna add 1 egg per can of salmon. I'm also using a tablespoon, actually for 4 cans, use a half a tablespoon for 1 can of minced garlic. So if you use a half a tablespoon for 1 can, I'm gonna use 2 tablespoons for 4 cans of minced garlic. I do maybe a half a tablespoon of black pepper, maybe a half a tablespoon of Lowry's seasoning salt, and a half a teaspoon or 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. So again, because I'm doing 4 cans, I'm doing 2 tablespoons of minced garlic, 1 tablespoon of black pepper, 1 tablespoon of seasoning salt, and 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. Now, I use kosher salt because it's not as salty as regular salt, and plus it's a whole lot less sodium. The turmeric, I will be using approximately 2 teaspoons of turmeric in the actual salmon. So let me get these eggs cracked, and it's always good to crack your eggs in a separate bowl, just in case you have shell, because once the shells are in the salmon, you can't see them. So it's best to crack them in the bowl to make sure there's no shells before you add them to the mixture. Okay, so I actually have a measuring spoon that actually measures 2 tablespoons. So I'm gonna put 2 tablespoons of minced garlic. And I think I got my measurements wrong on the last video. So it's 2 tablespoons of minced garlic is a half a tablespoon of pepper. So 1/2 a tablespoon of pepper. So note that. And that's only because I'm doing 4 cans. If you're doing 1 can, then you want to do 1 teaspoon of pepper. 1 teaspoon of pepper for 1 can of salmon. 1 teaspoon of pepper and 1/2 a tablespoon of minced garlic for 1 can. 1 teaspoon of pepper for 1 can. 1 teaspoon of sour seasoning salt for 1 can. 1 teaspoon of salt, whether it be kosher or regular salt, for 1 can. And 1 teaspoon of turmeric for 1 can. But because I'm doing 4 cans, I'm doing 2 tablespoons of minced garlic, 1/2 a tablespoon of ground pepper, 1/2 a tablespoon of seasoning salt. That's good, right? Ooh, a little bit more than I expected, so I'm gonna pour some back in there. All right, and 1/2 a tablespoon of kosher salt. I like to measure that to the T though. I don't like it to be overly salty or anything. I'm gonna do that. And then we're gonna do our 1/2 a tablespoon of turmeric. Turmeric doesn't really have a flavor, but it has a lot of health benefits. So I use turmeric in almost everything that I cook. That's why I'm almost out, as you can see. There we go. Stuck at the bottom. All right. Now that we have our ingredients, you see there. So again, 1 can of salmon equals 1/2 a tablespoon of minced garlic, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of seasoning salt, and 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. And lastly, 1 teaspoon of turmeric, which is completely optional. You don't have to use the turmeric if you don't want to. I'm gonna take my 4 eggs that I've already cracked, add that. And then I'm going to mix with my hands. I use gloves when I cook because I just don't like the feeling of food on my hands. So gloves are optional. So I'm gonna mix that up. And then as I'm mixing, I'm gonna gradually add the onions to make sure that almost every salmon cake has onions. Because the onion, without the onions, is not really a salmon cake. So I see we need a bigger bowl. So I'm gonna transition the mix to this bowl because we still have to add our breadcrumbs. Let me get my hands cleaner because I gotta touch the bread bag. Now, I got my bread. So for each can of salmon, I'm gonna use, if this was regular bread, I would use, for 1 can of salmon, I would use 2 slices of white bread. But because we have this good seeded bread, this bread is a drinker of liquids, and I have 4 cans of salmon. So I'm gonna use 3 slices of this bread. This bread has seeds and other elements in it, which are fine, but they're big drinkers of the liquids in the salmon cake. So what I wanna do is add this bread. As you can see, it's seeded, heavily seeded, and I'm using the in-breads. It's great for using these for salmon cakes. Most people don't like to use it for their sandwiches, but I use these for mixtures and things like that. So what I'm gonna do is I still held my salmon juice. It's still here because just in case my mixture starts to get dry, I can add additional juice. So let's go ahead and break up the bread. Okay, so all the bread is broken up, and as you can see, the bread is dense. It's a dense type of bread. If you're using 1 can and using the 2 white slices of bread, white bread, then you're looking at it to be not as dense, because white bread is a whole lot more better than this type of bread. Then, before I complete my mixture and start making my patties, I'm gonna put my frying pan on the eye. Now, sometimes I use extra virgin olive oil or vegetable oil. Both are good to use. And sometimes I just use cooking spray, olive oil cooking spray. So this time I'm gonna be using the olive oil cooking spray. So I put my eye on medium, which is, I consider that 7 for my stove. You have to check yours to see where it stays in medium. Just make sure you're not overly cooking them, because if you overly cook them, you're gonna have raw onions. So you want your salmon to be on the eye for a little bit of time. You need it to be on the eye for a little bit of time, because you're gonna need the insides to cook. So if your frying pan seems like it's getting hot, then just turn it down. And I'm turning mine all the way to medium. And so it's gonna be nice and hot and ready to go by the time I'm ready to finish making my cakes. Okay, so I wanted to show you this. In mixing the concoction together, you see how it's kind of dry, and when I pick it up, it's a little brittle. That's why I'm gonna add some of that salmon juice that was on reserve, not too much. Just add enough so it can kind of break up that bread. And you can hear that it's more juicier. And you see how it's not breaking up as much? So you want to do that, and you want to roll your patties into a nice size ball, not too big, not too thick, because you want, of course, the inside of the salmon cake to get cooked as well. So you don't want it a thick old, patty like that. So let's get started. Okay guys, so all the patties are prepared. As you can see, they're all pretty much in the same size. I try to always get it like the best I could in the same size. Bring this sheet over here so it could be closer to the frying pan. I've already placed one patty in there. When I hear this patty start to sizzle, I'm gonna know that it's ready to go. So let's wait on that, and I'll be back. Okay, so we have some activity here in the frying pan. It's really important when you first put them in to make sure that the other side is fried thoroughly. Not to be fully cooked, because you want to flip them at least twice, but you want it to be as cooked as possible, because it'll fall apart once you flip it over. So you want to, leave it for about, I would say, 4 to 5 minutes, and then kind of just lift it up to see if it's brown. If it's brown, then go ahead and flip it. Okay, so we're finishing up the last batch. I had to put another frying pan because I had so many salmon cakes from the 4 cans. And now I'm working on storage. I take some wax paper, not necessarily this brand, just whatever wax paper you can get, and I cut them long, and then I cut the long parts in half, so I would get this as a result. And then I take the salmon cakes. As you can see, I'm stacking them here. So I take the salmon cake out of the frying pan, I let it cool off in a bowl for a little bit, and then I take cuts of the paper and I put it in between each salmon cake. These salmon cakes can be frozen for up to 7 days. So throughout the week, for breakfast or even for lunch. Sometimes my husband makes a salmon cake sandwich. So you can definitely take it and just leave it on the wax paper in the freezer in an airtight container for up to 7 days, and you can enjoy them that way as well.